This is Still Unanswered. I'm Emily Hart. Today, we return to a case that has haunted Central Florida for 2 decades, the disappearance of Jennifer Joyce Kesse. She was 24 years old when she vanished in January 2006. A young finance manager, a new condo owner, a daughter and sister with plans and people who loved her. And yet, the ordinary rhythm of her life stops on a cold morning that most of us would never forget if it were ours. I'm joined by Detective Luis Moreno, retired homicide and cold case detective, 25 years on the job, who now consults on long-term missing persons investigations. Luis, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Emily. Glad to be here. It's heavy. You can feel the weight of it from the facts alone.
Yeah. I want to start the way we always start, with who Jennifer was. I think it's important to humanize before we go into timelines and theory. So, Luis, tell us about the Jennifer behind the headlines.
Right. Jennifer Joyce Kesse, born May 20, 1981. She grew up in Florida, graduated from Vivian Gaither High, went to UCF, and left with a finance degree in 2003. By 2006, she was working as a finance manager at Central Florida Investments. She'd just bought her own condo at the Mosaic at Millenia complex. She had a boyfriend, Rob, and a close family, parents Drew and Joyce, a brother Logan. From everything we can see, she had just hit a lot of the milestones people build toward. That matters when you think about motivations.
It matters a lot. The family and friends described her as responsible, punctual, cautious. She wasn't someone who would simply disappear without telling anyone. And small details, a shamrock tattoo, a surgical scar on the left elbow, a cleft chin, they make her real in our heads, right? They make the absence feel sharper.
Exactly. As an investigator, when you see someone with strong ties, stable employment, no indication of planning a departure, you bracket voluntary disappearance low on the list. You prioritize the possibility of foul play.
Okay, let's walk through the week before she vanished. It's important because it undercuts any "she wanted to leave" narrative. Jennifer and Rob went on vacation to St. Croix. They returned Sunday, January 22nd, 2006. Family told reporters she was on a cloud, happy, relaxed. She calls her parents, she's texting, she's engaged with life. Monday, January 23rd, she works a regular day. She calls her father around 6:15 p.m. while driving home. Then, at about 10 p.m., she speaks to Rob, the last confirmed contact. Then, Tuesday morning.
She doesn't show up for work. She doesn't call in. Her routine, which included a morning text or call to Rob, doesn't happen. Rob calls, and it goes straight to voicemail. Those early oddities are what flip the alarm for family and employer. When a dependable person disappears into silence, you act fast. But, and here I'm going to be blunt, the first 24 to 48 hours are when the most recoverable evidence is available.
Right, and we'll get to how that response unfolded. But just to keep the timeline tight, on Tuesday, January 24th, 2006, Jennifer is missing from her condo. Her parents are alerted by her employer around 11 a.m. They drive up from Tampa. They have the condo manager do a welfare check using a spare key, and the manager reports nothing obvious is wrong. But importantly, Jennifer's car is not where it normally is. Then, when the family arrives in the early afternoon, they find the condo showing signs that she'd been there that morning. Wet towel, pajamas on the floor, clothes laid out, hair tools on the counter. No purse, no keys, no ID, no cell phones.
And the door? Reportedly locked. No signs of forced entry, No overt signs of a violent struggle. Those elements complicate the initial crime scene narrative. When a door is locked and there's no forced entry, it opens up hypotheses. Maybe she let someone in. Maybe she was confronted outside. Maybe she left voluntarily and something happened elsewhere. As a detective, you mark a dozen possible paths and start eliminating.
Can we pause right there? Because those two images, a locked door and a towel in the bathroom, they're almost cinematic. They're what people latch onto. But they can mislead non-investigators into thinking no struggle equals safe. Not true, right?
Not true at all. A locked door could mean she locked the door when she left. It could mean someone left it locked after an incident. A towel doesn't explain much, except that she had been in the shower that morning. People are abducted leaving their homes all the time without visible signs of struggle if the confrontation is quick or if the victim is coerced by a friend or acquaintance.
And that's where we get to the discovery of the car, the black 2004 Chevrolet Malibu. For 2 days, it wasn't located. Then, on January 26, a resident at an apartment complex about a mile away, Huntington on the Green, sees the car on the news and realizes a similar car has been in their lot for days. They call police. The car is Jennifer's. Lewis, when the car is found, that's a key turning point. But the content of the car, at least publicly, was oddly underwhelming in terms of physical evidence, right?
Yes. The car was towed and processed. Public statements from OPD back then suggested DNA findings were limited to the steering wheel and inconclusive. That doesn't mean there wasn't more. It means either the evidence was insufficient at the time or wasn't publicly discussed. For an investigation, a vehicle like that is huge. It's a mobile extension of the person. But if it sat for days and was exposed to public, environmental, or human contamination, it becomes harder to parse what belongs to the victim and what doesn't.
And remember, this was 2006 technology. Surveillance cameras were grainy. Some cameras were hidden. That brings us to the surveillance footage that became the most tantalizing clue. At around noon on January 24th, the same day Jennifer disappears, cameras at Huntington on the Green captured someone parking her car and walking away. But there's a fence in the foreground that obscures the face. We have stills, but we can't get a clear ID. Agencies and the family have argued for years that the best lead we had was stuck behind a fence, both literally and figuratively.
That fence has been the source of endless frustration in the case. The imaging is not good enough to positively determine gender, though some agencies estimated height in the 5'3" to 5'5" range. What makes it worse is that gait and clothing sometimes point to ideas, like maybe the person was wearing work-style clothing, but nothing definitive. In 2006, the tools to enhance were limited. Over the years, they've tried everything: NASA image analysts, various forensic specialists. More recently, AI-based enhancement and facial/ear recognition have been used, but these tools can't perform miracles on pure noise.
There's been reporting that Jennifer's family and private teams partnered with an AI company to run newer analyses on that footage, and FDLE has said AI might help. In 2025 and 2026, we've seen new statements. FDLE took over the case in 2022, re-reviewed thousands of pages, did dozens of interviews, and in 2025 said the case was no longer cold. And then, this is huge, in October 2025, Jennifer's father announced FDLE found new DNA in previously untested evidence, and that the list of persons of interest had been significantly reduced. Lewis, as a former detective, what does that mean in practical terms?
When a cold case unit re-examines evidence and finds DNA that wasn't previously tested, it can change everything. Newer technologies like more sensitive DNA profiling, genetic genealogy, and improved contamination filtering can produce results that weren't possible earlier. If they've narrowed the suspect list, it suggests DNA profiles or corroborating investigative findings are connecting to people who can be located and queried. But I want to be cautious. Reduced list doesn't equal indictment. It means investigators think the pool is smaller and more workable.
So, cautious optimism. The family has invested heavily in their own pursuit, suing OPD in 2018 to get records, paying $18,000 in costs, and receiving about 16,000 pages and 67 hours of video and audio. They essentially assembled a private investigative team, crowdfunded over $500,000, hired PIs. That shift, families becoming quasi-investigators, has become increasingly common. How do you view that, Lewis?
On one hand, families are right. They deserve clarity and transparency. And they've often been the driving force that keeps cases alive when resources wane. On the other hand, when non-lawyers or non-investigators get access to raw files, there's the risk of misinterpretation, confirmation bias, or inadvertently compromising evidence. But given the Kesse's persistence, it sounds like they did it carefully and with professional help.
They did, and emotionally, it's devastating, but also galvanizing. Drew and Joyce turned grief into daily diligence. They've attended hearings, spent years fighting for access, and woke up every day thinking about what else they could do. Louise, we've covered the high-level timeline. Let's dig into the investigative theories people often raise.
Sure. There are a handful of dominant theories. One, that someone working at the condo site, a construction worker or day laborer, abducted her. Two, that it was an opportunistic stranger predator. Three, that she was trafficked. And four, the voluntary disappearance theory, which the family rejects. Each has arguments for and against.
Start with the construction worker theory. There's a clear context. Her complex was under construction, many workers present. Jennifer told her family she felt watched and catcalled. Private investigators and some media have focused on this angle. Why does it make some sense?
Because it's plausible. Construction workers were on site daily. They'd see patterns. Who comes and goes at certain times, which cars belong to residents. If someone was transient or felt anonymous among day labor populations, they could act with less fear of recognition. Also, language or immigration status can make witnesses reluctant to speak to police. Those are realistic investigative challenges.
But it has holes too, right?
It does. For one, you have to show a link between a particular worker and the victim, ideally physical evidence, witness sightings, or a motive. The difficulty is, after years, workers move, records vanish, memories fade. And if a worker was simply seen in the parking lot, that's not enough. Without a physical tie, like DNA or a credible witness, it's circumstantial. Still, it's an important lead.
Okay, next. Opportunistic stranger or predator. This is a common pattern in parking lot abductions. How does this case fit?
It fits in the sense that parking lots are high-risk environments, especially early in the morning. Someone could observe, follow, and seize a moment. The person in the surveillance footage walking away calmly could be a stranger who planned nothing more than to take a car or abduct. But again, no clear pattern tying similar assaults to the area around that time has been made public. So while it can't be ruled out, it's not airtight either.
Human trafficking has been floated as a possibility. Some people point to Orlando's tourism and trafficking networks. But as a pattern, traffickers usually exploit vulnerabilities. Jennifer didn't fit the typical trafficking profile, did she?
Right. Most trafficking cases involve grooming, exploitation of addiction, minors, or people in precarious situations. Sudden abduction from a locked condo and no demand for ransom or movement consistent with trafficking is less typical. Not impossible, of course, but less likely based on the known facts.
And the voluntary disappearance theory, dismissed by family, is inconsistent with her life. A new condo, job she liked, active social ties, and no financial evidence of planning. She'd just returned from vacation. So the prevailing working assumption for many investigators and the family is that something involuntary happened.
Yes, with that many social anchors, the voluntary angle is the hardest to make stick. As detectives, we look for motive, means, and opportunity. Motive is unclear if voluntary. Means and opportunity exist for an abducting stranger or acquaintance.
Emily here. But, Lewis, let me press on the acquaintance angle. The locked door suggests she might have opened it to someone she trusted, or at least someone who said the right thing. How often do kidnappings involve a door being opened willingly?
More often than people think. Many abductions begin with deception. The perpetrator poses as a delivery person, as maintenance, as someone who needs help. Others are acquaintances, where the person feels comfortable enough to open the door. If there was no forced entry, always consider the possibility that the initial interaction was consensual or deceptive, which is why interviews with neighbors and workers from that morning are crucial.
And that brings us to the questions the case still asks, the unanswereds that haunt the family and investigators. For our listeners, let's lay them out and talk about what each implies. Number 1, where did the abduction actually occur? In the condo? At the car? Somewhere else?
If the abduction occurred in the condo, you'd expect some sign. Torn fabric, displaced furniture, blood, or struggle evidence, but quick seizures may leave little trace. If it occurred at the car, you'd expect a witness or surveillance clip, yet we only have the person parking the car at noon. If it occurred elsewhere, then the person who moved the car left a deliberate breadcrumb. Each scenario implies different suspect sets, someone known to her for in-condo, someone watching her for car abduction, or a third party for remote movement.
Number 2, why was her car left at Huntington on the Green, 1 mile from her condo? Is that proximity meaningful?
Possibly. It could indicate familiarity with the area. Maybe the suspect lived or worked nearby. Maybe they had a reason to drop it where fewer cameras would catch them. Or it could be opportunistic. The suspect needed to get rid of the vehicle and chose a residential area that seemed quiet. The timing, parked around noon, means the suspect didn't panic. They were comfortable walking away.
Number 3, who is the person in the surveillance footage? Construction worker? Neighbor? Stranger? AI and new techniques have been applied to that footage. Can those methods actually overcome the fence problem?
AI can do remarkable things with pattern recognition and extrapolation, but it has limits. If the underlying pixels don't contain enough information, AI can at best generate a statistically probable face, not definitive proof. Where it helps more is in linking gait, body shape, or clothing patterns to other camera feeds, essentially connecting dots. But any output needs verification by human investigators and potential witnesses.
A fair warning about over-promising AI. Okay, number 4. What does the new DNA mean? October 2025 was the announcement. If DNA was found in previously untested evidence, what are the plausible outcomes?
1. The DNA matches someone in law enforcement databases, leading to identification. 2. It produces a partial profile that can be used for familial searching or genetic genealogy, which can create leads to potential relatives. 3. It doesn't match anyone, but it's entered into databases to compare as they grow. Any of these can shrink the suspect pool, but each step requires meticulous validation to rule out contamination and explain why DNA was present.
People hearing this will want to know, could that DNA tie to someone who had legitimate reasons to be in the car or condo? A repairman, a delivery person, a friend? In other words, false leads.
Absolutely. Context is everything. If DNA belongs to a known, explainable person, investigators need to corroborate alibis and timestamps. Sometimes evidence points to an innocent presence. Other times it points straight at a suspect. That's why you pair lab work with field work, interviews, timelines, cell records, vehicle data. That's why you pair lab work with field work, interviews, timelines, cell records, vehicle data.
Lewis, I want to talk about law enforcement response and the controversy around those first 48 hours. The Kesse family has been persistent in their criticism, claiming OPD treated Jennifer as a voluntary missing person for too long, possibly missing opportunities to canvass workers and secure leads. What's your take on how agencies can handle these early stages better?
First, it's vital to treat missing adults with nuance. While many adults do leave voluntarily, any sudden, unexplained disappearance by someone with strong ties should be treated with urgency. Early steps should include immediate neighborhood canvasses, door-to-door interviews, review of CCTV in and around the area, quick processing of vehicles, and preservation of all digital evidence. If there are construction sites or day laborers nearby, they should be canvassed quickly. The problem historically has been resource constraints and bureaucratic inertia. That's why changes like the Jennifer Kesse and Tiffany Sessions Missing Persons Act were important. They pushed for faster, standardized responses.
Tell us about that act. A legislative note. In 2008, Florida passed Senate Bill 502, the Jennifer Kesse and Tiffany Sessions Missing Persons Act, to reform how missing adults are handled. It encourages faster classification and better information sharing. Symbolically, that's huge, but practically?
Practically, it mandates quicker information sharing protocols and helps ensure certain missing person reports are escalated sooner. It doesn't replace groundwork, but it sets a framework so cases aren't dismissed or shuffled. It was a direct response to families who felt that early misclassification cost them precious time.
Back to the Kesse's lawsuit. In 2018, they sued OPD to get access to the files. The settlement in 2019 gave them 16,000 pages and 67 hours of video and audio. They used that to build a private investigation with funds raised via GoFundMe and other channels. There's power and also pain in having to do that. A family shouldn't have to sue to get answers.
No, they shouldn't. And a lot of families feel forced into that position when they sense a lack of transparency. But there is a reason agencies sometimes withhold. They worry about compromising active leads and prosecution. Still, openness with proper redactions and controlled releases is often a better public policy than secrecy.
Let's slow down and talk about the human cost. Drew and Joyce Kesse invested over $500,000 and 2 decades into this search. They were legally declared Jennifer's death in 2016, which is a legal milestone but an emotional gut punch. Luis, how does that legal declaration change the investigation, if at all?
Legally declaring a person dead helps a family with financial and legal matters, but it doesn't mean investigators stop working. It can, however, change public perception and sometimes trigger different investigative avenues. For example, cold case units may take interest if a case is considered unsolved homicide rather than missing. Ideally, it should have no negative impact on active investigative efforts.
In recent years, especially 2022 onward, the FDLE's Cold Case Missing Persons Unit has stepped in. They reviewed tens of thousands of documents, interviewed over 100 people, and revived evidence testing. FDLE says the case is not cold anymore, and in 2025 and 2026 released updates. Does that energy translate into results? What typically happens when a state cold case unit takes over?
State cold case units bring resources, fresh eyes, and newer technologies. They often re-interview witnesses with refined questioning, revisit physical evidence with modern forensics, and apply digital analytics to old surveillance. Sometimes they find nothing new, but other times they crack cases decades old. The mix of patience and new tools is a strong asset.
We mentioned in October 2025 the discovery of new DNA and a narrowed persons of interest list. Then, in January 2026, for the 20th anniversary, FDLE said they'd done over 115 interviews and spent thousands of hours reviewing the case. So, listeners, this is not an abandoned file. It's active. Louise, how do agencies balance public updates with not jeopardizing an investigation?
They have to be strategic. You want to keep the public engaged. Tips are often crucial, but you can't leak details that reveal the direction of the investigation or inadvertently tip off a suspect. That's why controlled releases like dates, vague descriptions, and requests for tips are standard. Saying, "We have new DNA," is enough to spur interested parties to come forward without telling the suspect what sample or evidence is being tested.
Let's talk about the surveillance again for a moment. Suppose AI-enhanced imagery produces a clearer face or gait pattern. What does that realistically allow investigators to do?
Realistically, it allows investigators to create a better sketch or composite, to run comparisons against known associates, former employees, or people who lived or worked near the complexes. It can also fuel media appeals for recognition. If combined with DNA, it becomes exponentially more powerful because you have both visual lead and biological lead.
Single word?
Cautiously hopeful.
Cautious, hopeful. I want to open the conversation to the audience for a second. Well, kind of. We always ask, how can listeners help? If you're in Orlando and you were living near Mosaic at Millennia or Huntington on the Green in January 2006, if you worked on site as a construction worker or recall seeing a black 2004 Chevy Malibu parked for days, please call. Agencies like FDLE and the FBI welcome tips. Even a seemingly small detail can be the last piece of a puzzle.
Yes, small details matter. A day laborer's unusual absence that week. A neighbor who remembers seeing someone load the trunk at an odd hour. A coworker who remembers an off comment. People often discount what they know as not important. It is. Call tip lines. Submit to Crime Stoppers. Do it anonymously if that helps.
We should be specific. The FBI's VICAP listing for Jennifer Joyce Kesse and the FDLE cold case page both have ways to contact them and submit tips. And Jennifer's family has also been active in sharing information. Louis, let's do a realistic deep dive. If you were reopening this file tomorrow with the evidence as described, surveillance with a partially obscured subject, a vehicle found a mile away, a condo with no dramatic signs of forced entry, and a recent DNA hit, where do you begin?
I begin with the new DNA. I verify chain of custody and contamination controls. I run database checks and explore genetic genealogy if allowable. Simultaneously, I'd map all persons who could have had legitimate or illegitimate access to the condo and the vehicle. Residents, maintenance, delivery drivers, construction workers, acquaintances. I'd cross-check those names against the DNA results and the narrowed suspect list FDLE reportedly has. Then I'd re-interview critical witnesses with updated cognitive interviewing techniques. Sometimes people recall new details after being asked differently.
Would you also look at timelines and phone records?
Absolutely. Cell tower pings, call logs, and location data can place people at or near the scene. Vehicle registration and DMV records could show who was associated with the black Malibu in the past. Credit card activity and ATM footprints matter too. It's all connective tissue.
Let me ask something a lot of listeners ask. Is there any danger in publicity that the wrong kind of attention could push an abductor to cover tracks or cause witnesses to clam up?
There is that risk, yes. Publicity can cause guilty parties to destroy evidence or go into hiding, but generally, the benefits of public appeals, tips, and new witnesses outweigh that. Investigators try to time and tailor releases to maximize new information flow while minimizing investigative harm.
We should be transparent about controversies, too. Some critics maintain OPD mishandled early steps and that evidence preservation could have been better. OPD responds that they launched searches, mounted up and at units, helicopters, canine teams, and treated it as active. As a detective, what do you see when two sides have strong feelings like this?
I see a need for independent review. Families often feel left in the dark. Agencies often feel attacked. When this happens, a transparent third-party audit or state-level takeover, like FDLE's involvement, can help reconcile questions. It's not about assigning blame publicly. It's about determining whether protocols were followed and if improvements are needed.
All right. I want to return to the personal for a minute. 2 decades of searching is more than a legal fight. It's lost birthdays, holidays, and an entire life trajectory reoriented. The Kesses have become advocates for missing persons protocols for other families in similar situations. Louis, in your experience, what keeps families going for so long?
Hope, love, and refusal to let their loved one become a statistic. Many families say the same thing. As long as there's a chance, we're going to pursue it. The Kesses didn't accept unknown as final, and that persistence has kept public attention on the case and forced agencies to reevaluate evidence.
Before we close, I want to run down some of the most haunting, unanswered questions once more and ask you to briefly weigh in. 1. Was the person in the footage working at the condo? Louis?
Possibly. The clothing and gait could fit someone who worked there, but it's not definitive. It's a lead that needs corroboration with identification and alibi checks.
2. Did forensic testing miss DNA evidence early on that only newer techniques could find? Louis?
Yes, early testing was less sensitive. New technologies can reveal profiles from minuscule samples that would have been undetectable in 2006.
3. Could a key witness still be out there today, having never connected their memory to this crime? Louis?
Absolutely. People forget until something jogs their memory. Media coverage, AI reconstructions, or publicity can prompt a late tip.
4. Will new DNA lead to a prosecution? Louis?
That's the million-dollar question. DNA can identify, but to prosecute you need corroboration, motive, opportunity, chain of custody, and a case built in court. It's a promising step, not an automatic arrest.
I want to ask you a tougher question, Louis. If, hypothetically, the suspect was a transient construction worker who left the state shortly after 2006 and returned to their home country, how do investigators get there? Is it realistic?
It's challenging, but not impossible. You need records, payroll, day labor logs, subcontractor rosters, any temporary housing addresses. Combine that with genetic data or witness ID. International cooperation helps if the suspect leaves the country. It slows things, but doesn't make them unpursuable.
Listeners, at this point in our show, I'm asking you to remember, not sensationalize, the girl with the shamrock tattoo, who loved her family, who had a life she was building. If you have a tip, call. If you know someone who worked construction at Mosaic at Millennia in January 2006, ask them what they remember. Lewis, any final notes for the audience about how to approach old missing persons cases like this with care?
Treat them with empathy and caution. Don't speculate publicly about individuals. If you have information, contact law enforcement or tip lines. And support families. They're often doing this work on grief and savings. Respect the victim as a person, not a mystery.
That's important. Before we sign off, I want to let our listeners know how they'll hear updates. FDL has continued to post releases, the FBL VicCat page maintains details, and Jennifer's family remains active in outreach. We'll keep this case on our radar and bring you developments as they come. Lewis, thank you for your insight and your carefulness tonight.
Thank you, Emily. And to your listeners, stay curious, stay compassionate.
This episode of Still Unanswered was produced by me, Emily Hart. Our research pack included court documents, FDLE statements, public reporting, and interviews with family, former investigators, and experts. If you'd like to help Jennifer's case, we'll link resources and contacts on our episode page. And one last thing. If you remember anything at all, no matter how small, a car scene, a voice heard, a truck parked, please reach out. These details add up. This is for Jennifer, for Drew, for Joyce, for Logan, for the life that deserves more than a footnote. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another case soon. Good night.